Mr. Speaker, page 16 of the budget papers shows that the government will receive $196 million in revenue from the increase in the PST in the fiscal year just ending, but will only spend $125 million of this on core infrastructure this year. Now, the estimates of expenditure and revenue show that the remaining $71 million has been spent on items other than core infrastructure. The Premier said in his throne speech that every dollar raised from the new point of PST will be fully dedicated to new investments in core infrastructure. I asked the Premier, why has he already broken his commitment and spent that $71 million on items other than additional core infrastructure spending?
It's released our five-year plan to build a stronger Manitoba with respect to core infrastructure. On page 12, it indicates very clearly the $71 million will be rolled over into future years and will be invested in infrastructure. As a matter of fact, Mr. Speaker, we indicate that our base spending plus the PST money will total $5.147 billion. And in addition, we've put another $420 million aside to be able to cost share with the federal government their infrastructure Building Canada Fund investment, which will be about $235 million, less than 5% of our total plan over the next 5 years. So the money will be rolled forward. It will be accounted for on an annual basis on which projects it's spent in, and the entire five-year plan is laid out on page 12 of the plan that was put forward last week in Manitoba, Mr. Speaker.
We've had many plans before which never were pursued. Mr. Speaker, the $71 million, if they were legitimately set aside and rolled over, as the Premier phrased it last Thursday, the budget book of the government's revenues and expenditures would show it as a budgeted set-aside. It doesn't.
No.
Instead, the government's book on expenditures and revenues shows that every single dollar of that $71 million has been spent on items other than additional core infrastructure.
Yep.
Given the Premier's words, why did he break his promise and not spend all the money raised by the increase in the PST, money that he said was desperately needed last year, on additional core infrastructure as he promised?
Mr. Speaker, it's fully accounted for on page 12 of the five-year plan. An additional $420 million has been set aside over and above the PST and core infrastructure spending. By the way, Mr. Speaker, a historic record level of spending on infrastructure never seen before in the province of Manitoba. 58,000 jobs, $6 billion boost to the economy, very significant involvement in growing the Manitoba economy, both in the short term and putting assets in place that will generate economic prosperity with good infrastructure in the long term. $420 million, ample room within there to fully take up the $71 million and make additional resources available to cost share the federal Building Canada Fund, which will be about $235 million, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, Manitobans are not fools. In 2011, the Premier said he was never going to raise the PST. And of course, last year, he did. The Premier said he would spend every dollar raised by the new point in PST on additional core infrastructure. And now the budget papers show clearly that there was $71 million raised last year by the extra point in PST, which was not spent on core infrastructure. Exactly. It was spent elsewhere. The Premier continues to reinforce, sadly, his lack of credibility. I asked the Premier, why did he and his government spend that $71 million raised by increasing the PST on items other than additional core infrastructure?
Since the outset that we are going to ramp up this infrastructure investment program with earlier tenders, more training. The $71 million is more than offset. The $71 million is more than offset by $21 million over and above the commitment next year. It's offset by $66 million over and above the commitment in 2015-16. It's offset by $79 million over and above the base commitment in 16-17, $103 million over and above the base commitment in 17-18, and $151 million over the base commitment in 18-19. We are delivering more value than the PST generates in infrastructure investment. It will be accounted for every year. All the member has to do is look at page 12, and all the answers to his questions are there. All he has to do is read, Mr. Speaker.